another wonderful day before us and some more wonderful views from the island. And again, my Lord of the Rings nerdiness kicks in with all the views that you have around you. Once again, I'm thinking, my God, Mordor. Well, anyway, enough of nerdiness. Plenty of places to visit. Let's start with a very famous spot.
So this is the famous Spinalonga island. A bit of a tourist trap, really. As you can see, there's one big boat. There are more boats coming. €8 to even enter the place. Of course, you gotta pay for the boats. Anyway, a bit of a tourist trap in the economical sense. They do take advantage here. Well, anyway, we went to Gramvuza like a week ago, the little island with some Venetian fortification. That was pretty cool and a pretty unique thing. You've got a little island so close to the mainland that's so important. Here it's even crazier. Now, 16th century Venetians did build some extensive fortifications, as you can see behind me. But this is even crazier because the island is even smaller than Gramvuza and it's even closer to the land. But it still held its importance anyway. So that's one of the places that were used during the Cretan War to harass the Ottomans. That's one of those islands that Venetians didn't have to give up when they lost. But eventually, beginning of the 18th century, Ottomans come here. Now in Gramvuza, well, that was pretty much the end of the story. There were some pirates there, and that's it. Here, they actually built a little settlement, and supposedly it actually became rather successful in a certain time. But then, late 19th century, Cretans gained their practical independence, the Cretan state, and they decided to open here leper colony. Leprosy, Hansen's disease, was still an issue at the time, so they basically established on this island, obviously as an island isolated, a little leper town. Now, with time, cure for leprosy was discovered. So in the 50s, the place didn't make sense anymore. People just didn't get leprosy anymore. And it started just falling apart, kind of forgotten. And then there was an author, I can't remember the name and the book or anything, checked it a couple of times, it just goes into one eye and flies out with another. Anyway, typical. There's a book, Hollywood made a film about it or something. Anyway, suddenly huge influx of tourists, and the place now is pretty much on every tourist itinerary in central eastern Crete, and it's pretty much true. And obviously what draws people here is the leprosy issue. Well, I'm here for different reasons. I'm here for the Venetian fortifications. Anyway, we're gonna walk around without live commentary. Let's see what we can find.
First, let's have a look at the most impressive piece of fortification, Moseniga Bastion. And not only impressive on the outside, on the inside even more, kind of clinging to a piece of natural rock. But the most impressive bit is how thick the walls are. I hope you can see it here well enough. You can also climb it, which is awesome. And then you'll see the main reason why such a huge bastion is in the spot where it is. You are going to see a very narrow strait. So basically, when you have the main island, the main landmass of Crete, and then you establish on the little island here this huge bastion, you control the little strait. Nothing gets in, nothing that gets out without you knowing it. And basically, when it comes to the northern part of the island, the fortifications are still in pretty good condition, because here the slope is so steep that it was simply difficult to build houses here. But on the other side, the fortifications are practically gone, because that's the place where most of the settlement used to be. Now the little ruins that you see, that's pretty much it. That's the settlement, and it looked pretty awesome even 100 years ago. It supposedly housed around 1,000 people plus. Today it is mostly ruins, which mostly you can also walk around, and it does have a nice feel to it. But the main drag, so to speak, was renovated. So it's not only nice to look at, there are some shops, but it's a pretty cool little museum with plenty of information. And at the end of this part of the clip, I'm gonna leave a couple of them so you can read, pausing if you wish. So there's info about the fortification system and so on and so forth. But people come here first and foremost for the issue of leprosy. So there's of course information on that as well. But I think the best option is to find a gentleman named Epaminondas Remundakis. Now he was a young lawyer, 20 plus. He ends up here with leprosy himself. Now the place was actually horrible, as in it wasn't really a place to try to cure anybody. It was a place for the people with leprosy to die isolated from the world. And he started rebelling against it. He started reviving life in here. So actually in the end they started even opening things like a cinema or theater. And first of all, of course, he started fighting simply for the basic rights of the lepers. And you can find him on YouTube. There are a number of interviews with him which are rather heartbreaking, to be honest. Now here is a very nice last little view from the island of Spinalonga, and one more little detail, if you're wondering if the wind's blowing from the north, yes it is, and it's blowing hard. Those trees are little testimony to it. So here finally some of the extra info I promised, so if you feel like reading, just keep on pausing, and if not, well, a bit of patience please. In the meantime, we are moving on, and we're going to visit another very interesting spot, this time from the Byzantine times.
It's rather impossible to visit all the interesting little churches from the Byzantine times that you have here. There's literally hundreds of them. You enter a village and there's going to be 3, 4, many of them with some frescoes. Thing is, one of the most important ones supposedly is the one that you see now, Panagia Kera, in a little village called Kritsa. And actually we're going to visit the place very soon. There's an interesting person to talk about. But here, because it's famous, there are plenty of people. So unfortunately, no video inside. It's going to be rather difficult. So I'm going to use photos and a bit of commentary from off.
Now first, let's have the sensation of entering an Orthodox church. First, it's dark, and then, bam, you'll see frescoes everywhere, filling every single centimeter of space. Of course, in theory, here some of them are gone, but then again, it is 800 years old. Let's get into details. First, St. George, a very typical saint in Orthodox churches, and a saint that's not typical. Saint Francis. It is very interesting to see a Catholic saint in an Orthodox church. Then a piece of the Bible, escaping to Egypt, or the famous Last Supper. Here you can see at the table, perspective wasn't exactly a thing yet. Non-biblical figures, the Byzantine Caesars and their wives, also very common in Orthodox churches, and of course completely common in any type of church, Christ and the Holy Mother. But many people come here for something else, depictions of hell, which are, I don't know, half funny, half horrible, I'd say. Anyway, just a couple of examples, but if you're into Orthodox churches and frescoes, you can spend a long time here. Just remember that the prices are like this. Let's continue.
Around us is Kritsa already, so we're going to have a little walk around in a moment. But first, finally, on this island dominated by men, I can tell you something about an interesting female. So here's Kritsa, the daughter of Kritsa. Now she was born in the beginning of the 19th century as a daughter of one of the local Orthodox priests, a nice, pretty young Greek girl, one of the Yanchars, one of the Janissaries. Local Turk fell in love with her. Of course, abducted her. They got married, and time for the wedding night. So she, depending on the version of the legend, one way or another killed him, got dressed in his clothes, and ran away. The Greek War of Independence is going on, so she joins the rebellion, and she fights as beardless Manolis, officially a young boy. Very firstly, there's a big battle down in the valley of Kritsa, and he is wounded So when they want to treat him, turns out it's not a him, it's a her. And she decided to reveal her identity. She was buried supposedly somewhere here in a local cemetery. And she became very quickly a local folk hero. So here's the legend. What the reality is, I actually tried looking up some information, found nothing. So this time I am going to stick to the official legend. Now she became kind of an emblematic person. So here's the main drag named after her, not Venizelos, which is an interesting, nice little change, and the supposed little museum in her original house. So let's have a walk around, let's see what happens.
First, a little look at the main drag, of course the typical shops with souvenirs for tourists, although some of them were actually very interesting. But more interesting are the side streets. First of all, plenty of beautiful places, a lot of green as you can see, if there are people living in those places. Unfortunately, then there are plenty of such places. I would say roughly half of the places are abandoned, which is a bit weird because I can kinda understand if it's a little town or village somewhere in the middle of the island and living simply off farming, then maybe people want to escape. But in theory, Kritsa is a touristic spot. So if there are tourists, there's money, and in theory, the place should be well off. And still, half of it is empty anyway. So even from such places, people basically leave, which is of course a very sad thing. But if there are people living in a place, as you can see, it is beautifully prepared. Anyway, we were looking for the Museum of Kritsa Topula, and here it is, closed. So we kissed the door goodbye, and off we went in search of more ruins.
We're going up again to see more rocks. Now you may be asking, rocks again? They're all the same, those pile of rocks, aren't they? Well, not exactly. Now, first of all, how can you tell the difference between a Minoic site and classical or Hellenistic? Well, first of all, if it's classical or Hellenistic, here's a detail. We have to go up.
First, the ruins of one of the main gates to a place called Lato. Now, it used to be very impressive. You can see the blocks are huge, but what's I think even more impressive is when you start looking at the stories of all those little city-states, especially from the time of so-called classical Greece. See, the thing is, they were waging their own complete and full-on Game of Thrones. When you start reading about their history, it's full of wars, and there are alliances against other alliances. Then they start, changing the alliances, and there's this treason, and there's this, and there's that. It's a complete Game of Thrones 2.0. So most of those little city-states, at one time or another, were razed, and some of them did not recover. And I'm talking already more than 2,000 years ago. Now, some of you may actually have a little bit of a deja vu after watching the episode 3. We were there in Polyrrhenia. Well, that's pretty much the time and the similar story. Now, it was only Alexander the Great that finally changed here the ideas, and most of the city-states in Crete just started living together more or less in peace. Now, I mentioned Polyrrhenia because, well, here you definitely have more ruins to see than there, but there's one thing: the views are as amazing as back there. So, of course, again, you can see the sea and then the interior, complete control of the surroundings. Last little bit, some coins from Lato and more ruins.
I do promise you, there's going to be no more ruins. Well, maybe one or two more. But this is a place called Malia, another beautiful Minoan palace. And mind you, this is a beautiful big courtyard. Some of the walls are actually 2-3 meters high, which is pretty amazing. And I'm going to show you a couple of interesting details. But here, one thing which I find amazing. We've been to Lato, high on a hill with big walls. And here, There's a little hill close to the palace. That's better for defending the spot. But it's not on the hill. It's here where we are. And there are no walls. Actually, where were the walls in other Minoan places? Now, this is something very interesting. The culture has, what, 1,500 years roughly, and there's practically no examples of war. There were no walls around the palaces. None of them, as far as I know, were destroyed by war, cataclysms. There are no examples, material examples of military, like, I don't know, shields or weapons or anything. Maybe because they were thalassocracy, so power of the sea. Maybe that was the place where they waged war, but there's also nothing about it anywhere. Maybe this is the only, I think, at least the only that I know of, pacifistic culture in human history, and that would make the Minoans very special in one more extra way of understanding the word.
And of course some bits and pieces that were found in Malia. So I mentioned no military, actually there were swords, but they were mostly used as symbols of social status, not for actual war. Of course, details about what you're seeing now in a second. As usual, the explanation is coming in detail. Just pause and enjoy reading. And some of it isn't only weaponry, there are bits and pieces from the cosmetic side of things, and that's the official highlight that was found in Malia. But for us, it's almost over. But as I promised, there should be a mantinada at the end. This time it's not to food, it is a mantinada to ruins. Ready? So, diamonds and gold and silver and jewels are no friends of mine. Just point me to another pile of rocks and I will be fine. Till next time.